Well, welcome in, everyone. I'm Jay Smith, and this is Bradley Kendall, and this is another episode of After Further Review. Bradley, after further review?
It was the season premiere of Survivor this week in college football.
Couple of scares.
A lot of top teams going on the road. You know, first real interesting test, hostile environments. We're kind of getting the best of some of the top teams, notably some of the teams we're about to talk about right now.
Yeah. First game we'll go ahead and jump into was TCU, Oklahoma State. I know last week I had the Cowboys in my top four. They tumble this week. They lose 31-44 to the Horned Frogs, who are now 4-0. And they look like they are a legit contender for the Big 12 title. You know,
Gary Patterson, coming off of bad seasons like they had last year where they were 6-7, is dominant going into his next season. I mean, you look at the score. I believe it. Let's add it up here. It was 20-10 at the half. TCU completely controlled the game from start to finish. Kenny Hill, you know, he had that whole Kenny trill, or the first 3 games of his career at Texas A&M. He was on fire, kind of tampered off, but he's really reigniting his career at TCU, and it's really working out for him.
Well, I think another thing that you have to look at, I mean, Kenny Hill did great passing, but the Frogs ran 52 times for 238 yards.
Darius Anderson leading the way with 3 touchdowns for him.
That's really impressive. And to be so balanced, really, I think, took Oklahoma State off guard, and that's what gave them the win.
It did, and, you know, they relied a lot on Mason Rudolph, and while he didn't really have one of his best games, it really was just Oklahoma State's defense. They were not able to stop TCU at all. You know, it was something that Oklahoma's kind of been known for a lot lately, being, you know, strictly offense. He thought maybe Oklahoma State could rise to the occasion, but it just wasn't meant to be. You know, the mullet didn't come through.
Their run defense just wasn't that impressive. I mean, they gave up a 42-yard touchdown run with about 2.5 minutes remaining, and that pretty much iced the game. So like you said, I mean, their defense was really their Achilles heel in this game, because offensively they did okay, but they just were not able to hang with TCU for all 4 quarters.
I mean, right now we've got a second really contender in the Big 12. I mean, you know, 4-0 for TCU in complete control. They got 1 game up on Oklahoma State, and you know, showdown coming up later this year with Oklahoma is really going to be interesting now.
It will be. Next game we're going to look at was, I guess, the game of the week last week, because they had Herbie and Fowler. They're calling it arguably the best game, one of the best games so far this season. Penn State and Iowa came down to the final play.
It did. I mean, you know that Iowa was going to provide, you know, kind of a scare for Penn State. You know, you saw what happened to Michigan last year.
You knew it was going to happen?
I knew it was going to be a lot closer than people thought. I know the line didn't really say that. You know, they thought Penn State would just run right through. Trace McSorley played well. Saquon Barkley, I think this was really his coming out party for the Heisman Trophy. Against a really stingy Iowa defense, put on a show and literally rose to the occasion by getting up on that play that he hurdled one of the Iowa defenders. But, hey, they escaped, survive and advance, so good for Penn State.
Yeah, I think this is a huge road win for them. I mean, especially because it was a night game. I know Iowa may not be considered the toughest of environments, but it was still impressive that they were able to come out of there with a win. I do think that they could have played a little bit better. I mean, overall, like even Iowa, to only score 19 points and Penn State's 21.
For a team that's known for offense.
Right. I just felt like that Penn State couldn't get anything going. It was almost a boring game until the 4th quarter.
And something to note, Saquon Barkley, while he's a great player, I'm looking at the box score now, they relied so heavily on him to just squeak by in the last minute. 28 carries, 12 receptions alone for one guy. You know, going forward, a lot of defenses are probably going to just hone in on him and not even worry about the rest of them. So it's going to be Trace McSorley's job to really spread the offense out and try and get more guys involved besides him.
Again, though, I think at the end of the day, Michigan came at Iowa City a year ago, and they lost 14-13. So if you're the Nittany Lions, you've got to be happy that you came out of here with a win, especially on the road at night.
Exactly. Going forward, tremendous confidence boost for them going into the rest of the season.
Next game we'll touch on was in the SEC. This game wasn't even close. The Georgia Bulldogs smashing Mississippi State 31-3 between the hedges. What were your main takeaways from this game after Mississippi State's dominant performance against LSU?
You know, when you said it wasn't even close, I honestly thought you were referring to the Alabama-Vanderbilt game, but you're referring to the Georgia-Mississippi State game, which also applies. Georgia, complete control, you know, the most dominant Bulldog team we saw. Jake Fromm only threw 12 passes, had 201 yards, very, very efficient. They just completely dominated the line, which is something Mississippi State prided themselves on after the game against LSU. You know, Georgia right now is the premier contender behind Alabama in the SEC. In a weak SEC East, they can reign control on it, I think.
Yeah, I think this game, and arguably the Alabama-Vandy game, I know I picked Vandy in that, how silly do I look now, but I think it really showed I guess it's the gap or the lack of depth in the SEC this year, where you really only have Alabama and maybe Georgia. We'll have to see. I'm not too sure how legitimate Mississippi State was. I know they beat up on LSU at home, but
LSU was still a little bit shaky coming
into
the
year, I mean,
yeah.
I get that, but take that with a grain of salt. But yeah, I think really it's just down to 2 teams with Alabama and Georgia. And if Georgia continues to improve, they're 4-0 now. Pulling up their schedule, they've got.
It's fairly manageable.
Well, they've got a road game at Tennessee. That's always tricky. Then they go on the road to Vandy. Alabama didn't seem to have any issues with that. But then they've got Mizzou at home. They've got South Carolina at home. They do have Florida at home. And then they go on the road to Auburn and then close out the SEC slate home against Kentucky. So really, I see
a lot of good mediocre teams on that.
A lot of good mediocre teams, but they should win
They're going to be
if
favored
not
in all
one
of
of
them.
those. Yeah, they should be. They should be
Yeah.
favored, maybe except for on the road at Auburn.
And I think for
depending
their
on how Auburn
case,
does.
they can suffer a loss. I think with how weak the SEC East is, they can suffer a loss, win the SEC championship game, probably work their way into a playoff spot.
Yeah.
So, looking great for Georgia right now.
Yeah, I agree. Next game we're going to touch on was in the Big Ten. This one was a shootout. Oklahoma takes down Baylor 49-41. Baylor falls to 0-4. I don't think they're going to go bowling this year.
Probably not, and they have like 4 hard games, I believe, coming up. 3 or 4 hard games, so it's going to be tough. This was really their one chance to really get something going. You know, they looked a lot better than I thought they were, especially after coming off a loss to an FCS opponent a couple weeks ago. Oklahoma, a little bit alarming that they allowed 41 points and how close it was to a Baylor team. I realized it was on the road, but they really just had to squeak by in the end. So a team that looked completely dominant against Ohio State, not the same against Baylor.
No, I mean, Baker Mayfield threw for 3 touchdowns, and it is important to note that this is Oklahoma State's, or Oklahoma, their 14th straight win. So that's something, and I believe the Trojans now are at 12 or 13.
Like so
they're about
they're
the
both
same
right
ballpark.
up there, yeah.
So that's still impressive. I mean, it's hard week in, week out. That's like what Dabo reiterated at his press conference today. I mean, the biggest game of the year is the next game because every team's going to give you their best shot. So you really have to come prepared. I mean, a team that's 0-3, now 0-4, they didn't have anything to lose in that game. They probably played their hearts out.
Got to respect them.
Which is exactly right, which is why they were able to hang with the Sooners for all 4 quarters.
And you saw what Oklahoma State did against TCU, how they struggled to move the ball. This is going to be something to look towards when Oklahoma eventually plays TCU. If they struggle to move the ball, can their defense even keep them in the game? They honestly couldn't here. They relied a lot on Baker Mayfield, so...
Next game, we'll go back to the SEC. This one was a blowout.
No,
Wasn't even close.
not much to talk about here.
Crimson Tide, 59-0 over the Commodores. You know, some people, myself included, thought that this was possibly...
Hey, Joey Galloway did the same thing, so you're not the only one.
Going to be a good game, but Crimson Tide showed up and showed out, dominating in all facets.
They were mad. And when you make Alabama mad, when you awaken the beast, you're in for a long day. Vanderbilt probably getting a little too ahead of themselves there. The 3-0 start was a little bit deceiving. One thing to take note of, though, Alabama does have Jalen Hurts. He's their starter. But their backup, Tua Tagovailoa, I don't know how to pronounce his last name, the guy from Hawaii, their freshman, came in the game and looked great. So the future is bright for Alabama. That should not make anybody else feel
What's really scary about
good.
this final score is, the box score rather, is Alabama totaled 677 total yards. Vanderbilt totaled 78. Alabama 600 more yards. They also had 42 minutes and 55 seconds of possession. Vanderbilt, I guess, barely had 5, maybe 6 possessions the entire game. Just
Be careful if you put a "We Want Bama" sign up from now on because it's not probably going to lead to anything good for your team.
They did have 3 first downs. Vanderbilt had 3 first downs
In
the
the whole
entire
game?
game, and Alabama had 38. So I think that pretty much
God.
is a picture of the fiasco that was that football game.
Looking forward, Vanderbilt just needs to forget this and move on.
Yeah.
That's basically the way we can play.
Last game that we'll look at from last week, obviously our Clemson Tigers took down BC, a game that lasted all 4 quarters. It took a while for Clemson to get going. They scored 27 points in the 4th quarter. They come out with a 34-7 victory. Do you feel like that Clemson was sleepwalking for the first 3 quarters, or do you feel like that BC was legitimately challenging them throughout the game?
I think a little bit of both. The play calling was a little suspect. I think Clemson relied a little bit too heavily on the run. The one thing I did take note of, though, is how Boston College, they rushed on 50% of the throws that opponents dropped back on. So you saw when the pressure really got to Kelly Bryant, he was not able to do what he'd been doing the previous 3 weeks. So, something that a lot of teams are probably going to take note of going forward. Unfortunately, luckily Clemson came out with a win. We saw Travis Etienne break out.
I understand the hesitation about the running of the football over passing, and I understand that since probably 2011, 2012 with Watkins and Hopkins here, Clemson's been a pass dominant team.
Yeah.
But I think it's shifting. In my opinion, I think right now the deepest position for Clemson is running back.
5 reliable guys, including Kelly Bryant.
You've got Choice, you've got Feaster, you've got Fuller, you've got Etienne.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many, and then you got Kelly Bryant, who is a runner in and of himself.
I think he has 7 rushing touchdowns this year. So
far, so really for Clemson, I understand that it took them a while to get going in this game, but at the same time, I look at the depth at running back, and I really don't have any complaints. I mean, yes, it did take them a while to get up on the scoreboard, but there's so many guys that they can just plug in offensively that they know are going to, have explosive plays. That, to me, it just kind of was a coming out party for Clemson's rushing game.
That's true. And, it is a little alarming when the leading receiver in the entire game had 58 yards, and that was Jeff Smith for Boston College. But I like what you say. When Kelly Bryant is struggling, when the teams are really rushing him and focusing all the attention on him, they can just dump it off. And they've got 4 guys that can really help.
Explosive
guys.
So,
I mean,
they
that
can
is
change
encouraging
the
going
game.
forward. A lot to learn, though, coming into the Virginia Tech game.
All right, well, now we'll transition into our favorite segment, I guess.
would say, yeah.
5 good questions. I think you're asking the questions this week, so why don't you go ahead and rattle them off?
You got your flag ready?
You got that flag right there.
That's right. Yep. Cool. Let's see. First question. After a really great week for both these teams, do you think Georgia and TCU are now contenders or pretenders?
Ooh, are we talking contenders in their conferences?
College football playoff.
Oh,
contenders.
college football playoff.
I guess you could say conference too, because that leads to the playoff.
Okay. Yeah, that's hard. I'm going to go with pretenders.
Both teams.
Both teams. I haven't quite. Maybe I'm leaning more towards TCU just because they don't have to play Alabama in a conference championship. But I just don't think I've seen quite enough yet. I think the Georgia game against Mississippi State was impressive, but at the same time, you have to kind of look at Mississippi State and the circumstances that surrounded the ranking of that team. TCU did great against Oklahoma State, being able to knock them off. But again, it's so early in the season. There's so much left in terms of like games and just rivalry games. Those are always really tough. So I'm going to go with pretenders.
I'm going to throw the flag on that.
Oh.
Only reason is because I feel like if you solidify a team as the second best team, if not the first best team in a conference, they're contenders. Georgia, going forward, pretty manageable schedule, like we said. They're probably the second best team in the SEC.
Yeah.
They'll have their chance against Bama. May not happen, but they're at least contending. TCU, second best team arguably in the Big 12. Pretty good schedule going forward, and they saw they could take down one of the top dogs in the conference. I like what they're doing now. I think going forward, they're both top 10 teams. I think you have to put them as contenders.
That was a weak flag throw. That was a flag placement is what that – I mean, if you're going to have
Well, it is still early. It is still early.
I
If
guess,
this was week 9,
you're going to have to do a
maybe
little
I'd
bit better
toss
for
it.
that because that was like
I got four
flag
more.
placement
I got
there.
4 more questions.
All right, hit me with that second question.
All right, second question. We got them right here, right in front of me. Does Duke at 4-0 have a chance to win the ACC Coastal?
Duke, do they have a chance to win the ACC Coastal? I got to pull up Duke's schedule because I don't know it off the top of my head. Here they are in the Coastal. They're on top right now. They've got Miami this week at home. Then they go at UVA. They have an FSU game at home that looks winnable all of a sudden. They've got Pitt at home. They have to go on the road at Virginia Tech. Then they're going to play Georgia Tech at home and finish out at Wake. To be honest with you, I think their hardest 2 games left this year
One of them being probably next week.
I'm going to go at Virginia Tech and at Wake Forest. Because the
Wake.
Demon Deacons
They're 4-0.
are 4-0, and they are in the same – they are both in
the Coastal.
Coastal Division together. So
Actually, wait. Are they? I think Wake might be in the
Is
Atlantic.
Wake in the Atlantic?
They might be.
Yeah, they are. They're
They
second
in
in the
Atlantic,
ACC
yeah.
Atlantic. So you're right. So they're separate divisions.
We asked this question last year. Did Wake have a chance to win the
Well,
division?
I mean, I don't think this year with Clemson and how everything's shaping up in that regard, but I do think that Duke has a legitimate chance at taking the Coastal because it's just kind of a muddled mess right now. Although Virginia Tech is, I mean, as good a team as any I've seen in the ACC. So
I'm not going to throw the flag on this, but I am going to take it a little bit. I'm not going to be as confident in this as I would because if you look at the game, Duke has to go out on the road to Virginia Tech.
yeah, that's tough.
That's going to be a hostile environment.
That's
If they
tough.
come down and they're both battling for the Coastal, it's going to be a very tough game to win. The only thing I would say is Virginia Tech does play Clemson this week. So if they take a loss to Clemson, not only would that drop them back, but it would not only rise Duke
It would help
up.
Duke tremendously.
I'm going to have to wait until the game against Miami to really decide if I can really slide Duke in there quite yet.
All right.
So I'll wait.
That's
but
fair. That's fair.
We'll move on to the next question.
Third
All right.
question. Hit me.
Third question. Should Travis Etienne be the starter at running back for Clemson after what we've seen?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. There should not be a consensus starting running back for Clemson. I think you start getting into really dangerous territory when you have to name a starter. I think at the end of the day, you've got 3, 4, 5 guys that all could be starters. And that's something that Dabo's reiterated. That's something that Jeff Scott has reiterated. Chad Morris.
stuck in the past.
That's a couple years ago. Jeff Scott reiterated on Monday is that they feel like that they can take any one of those guys in any situation during a game, plug them in, and they'll be successful. I think when you start labeling guys as the starter or the backup, you
make a little divide.
You marginalize the team a little bit is what I'm getting at. So no, I don't think that he should be named the consensus starter because I think that there are other guys that are deserving of that title.
Got it.
Really?
How bad do you want me to throw the flag now?
You might have to throw it up in the rafters.
24 carries, 7th in the ACC in rushing, 12.7 yards per carry. That's
so
all
dividing the team is lost.
That is all I'm going to say.
Oh.
If you watched the game this weekend, Clemson basically showcased 3 running backs.
Did I watch the game? I was at the game.
If you watched it closely, 3 running backs were showcased through 3 quarters. Yeah. Tavian Feaster, C.J. Fuller, Adam Choice. Look what the score was, 7-7. You put ETN in the game, completely changed the game around. He's their most dynamic runner by far. He may not be able to block as well for Kelly Bryant, and that may be something...
Dynamic, not consistent.
Not consistent.
Dynamic.
24 carries. He's almost leading the ACC in rushing. He leads our team in rushing by a lot.
I understand, but he's young, and I would rather have a guy back there like Feaster or even Choice because I know what I'm going to get from them. I mean,
a mediocre running attack. Feaster,
6.5 yards
not.
a carry is not mediocre. That is
good. Why settle for 6 when you can have 12?
My point is you should not start labeling guys when you have 4 guys that all could be the starter for any team. Realistically, they could all start at pretty much any team in the ACC. Why compartmentalize them and label them? When
maybe not starter, but who should
that?
get the most carries then?
I think it depends on the situation. Depends on the defense. Depends on the defensive scheme that they're seeing. I mean, that's a game-by-game basis. You can't just go in and be like, yeah, Choice is going to be the running back for the rest of the year, and then you go up against a scheme defensively that doesn't play well to Choice.
That's true.
You've got to be able to substitute guys.
Dabo did say that C.J. Fuller had a great game against VT last year and is a great blocker, and we do need that.
You need pass blocking,
but
I don't
with
trust
a quarterback now that is relying a lot on his legs and a lot on his running backs.
Wait till he takes a hit. Wait till he takes a hit, and you'll see how much he runs then.
He's going to try to run, but you need a guy back there that you can change a game with, and I think ETN is that guy. He basically won us the game this week.
I do not disagree at all. I don't think that he single-handedly won the game. I think Clemson's rushing game won the game, but I think that you got to be able to spread the ball.
To win us the game. I know what you're saying.
Next question.
Are Florida State struggles solely because of their injuries, or is this just a team trouble?
Well, the loss to Alabama was team injuries. I think that's pretty self-evident. The loss this past week, I feel like, was a lack of morale because of the loss that they said. Now, I mean, granted, there's been a lot of other things that have gone on with the weather. Games have been canceled. I think they've had a game canceled, a game delayed.
1 or 2 games canceled.
Yeah.
I don't think
So
they've played for 3 weeks.
Their season has just been very unique. And I don't think it's fair to just blanket it and say that injuries are the cause of this debacle. I mean, they're only 0-2. They still could win 10 games. Are they going to win 10 games?
Probably
No.
not.
They're going to go bowling. I mean, it's not a Florida State-style season. It's not what their fans expect. But I think at the end of the day, they had a rough patch to start. Now, it will be impressive if Jimbo can bring rally the troops enough to where they can get back and salvage the season.
Yeah. Not going to throw the flag on that. Completely agree. I think it was not only Francois' injury, they were basically out of the game against Alabama already. Their offensive line still is just not protecting the quarterback well. Their defense is still a little suspect, allowed so many big plays to NC State. Derwin James is only one player. Yeah. They need a lot around him. Yeah. So, honestly, I thought they were really overrated at 3 to begin the year anyway, and we're seeing now that it just was not meant to be this year for them. So moving on, 5th question. We mentioned him earlier, the great game he had against Iowa. Is Saquon Barkley the Heisman frontrunner at this point?
Oh, gosh, these are such open-ended questions. I mean, there's tons of guys that could go to New York at this point. Now, there's some guys that have already closed the door on that. I mean, you could still, you could argue that Lamar doesn't deserve it now that he lost to Clemson at home. Or you could say that Lamar's still done pretty well, relatively speaking. I mean, you could say that, Kelly Bryant's been pretty good. Sam Darnold. I haven't heard Jake Browning's name much out of Washington.
He's been fantastic.
Has he been good?
He's been good. I mean,
I haven't seen much
4-0.
of him on the Heisman boards, but I think at the end of the day, there's no clear front runner until about week 8, week 9, week 10. And I mean, you're picking a guy. You might as well go pick a horse in the Kentucky Derby because it's too early.
I think you're making this way too hard than it is. He's the best player in college football right now.
What kind of flag throw
plain and
is
simple.
that? You're gonna have to throw it.
I don't want to hit you or knock a mic over.
You gotta throw the flag. Okay.
Anyway, I'll work on that for next week to make you happier. But yeah, I mean, Saquon Barkley, best player in college football. We saw that hurdle that he had, kind of like the Lamar hurdle you had against Syracuse last year. That was basically his coming out of the country.
So if he hurdles
no, I'm not just saying that, but that was
his
highlight moment.
So he's a poster child.
211 yards, 12 receptions.
Yeah.
Again, basically won the game against Iowa, and he's on one of the top 5 teams in the country.
I don't know if he basically won the game.
He was most of their offense was relied solely on him.
Most of their offense was only scored 21 points.
He's only one player, though. He can only do so much, and he did his fair share, that's for sure. I think right now he's the clear-cut best player in the country right now. Now, Baker Mayfield is right behind him, but I think right now, if you had to give out the award today, Saquon Barkley would be my winner. I know it's still early, but to this point, I think it's also noteworthy that Sam Darnold's struggling so much. Barkley has
that's interesting.
taken advantage
You've got Josh Allen and Sam Darnold that really haven't lived up to the expectations coming in, and so it'll be interesting to see. I'm more interested to see where the because we had a lot of great quarterbacks coming into the year, where those quarterbacks fall in the draft more than I am who's the front runner for the Heisman.
There's a lot of good players, though, and I think this year particularly with a lot of great players, the winner really stands ahead as a great player. Because I think there's a lot of good players across the country.
That's fair.
So.
That's like that every year, though.
That's
always
true.
Great talent.
I know.
All right, we'll transition now into some recent news. Nebraska just fired their athletic director. So is this pretty much guaranteed that Mike Riley's going to be fired by the end of the season?
They called him the lame duck on ESPN. He's basically sitting there by himself with no direction at all. And basically,
they're not going to hire a new AD?
They will, but if I were a new AD, the first place I'd start would be firing Mike Riley. Again, they struggled this week against Rutgers. Rutgers is barely a Power 5 team at this point.
Yeah.
So I think it's just been too much. He's been in the news too often for him to even stick around. He may survive the season, but if you're an AD, you want to start fresh, and this is the first place you need to start. Because football's huge for Nebraska.
I think so. I think your fan base is pretty disgruntled. It makes firing Bo Pelini look really bad. We touched on that last week.
Yeah.
Just, if it's... I assume, will he get bought out? Is that part of his contract? Do you know?
I'm not sure about the contract.
Most coaches.
They're going to do whatever it takes, though.
Yeah, because I know Brian Kelly at Notre Dame gets a pretty decent buyout.
Yeah, if he would have lost this week, I think he'd be fired right now, Brian Kelly. It's arguable, but...
Yeah. But losing to Rutgers, if they'd have lost to Rutgers, I think he'd already been out.
We kind of hinted at this earlier. The NC State upset of Florida State, how much the injuries and the talent overall, impacted Florida State's derailing their second game of the year. The NC State player, I don't know if you remember last year when we talked about UNC being a contender.
The tomahawk
doing
chop?
The tomahawk chop.
That's right.
You
lost that bet, didn't you?
Yeah. Bring back old news. But NC State, one of their players spit on the midfield logo at Florida State. Now, I know nowadays it gets blown out of proportion. It's kind of like the Baker Mayfield incident where he shoved the flag into the midfield at Ohio State.
Yeah.
Do you think this was just total disrespect? Do you think he needs to apologize? Or do you think it's just in the moment? It's well-deserved.
I mean, he just spit on the field. It's not...
I think without a camera, nobody would ever noticed anyway.
And most of the people that are upset about this
are Florida State fans.
Have never been close enough to the football field to hear some of the dialogue that goes on between the players, especially in the trenches. Well, let's just say that it isn't always PG.
Yeah.
So, at the end of the day, this is just like, I don't even want to call it news. It's just fodder for people that want to start something. And to be honest with you, they won the game. They didn't drop their drawers and take a dump out on the field. It is what it is.
Probably
I don't know
wanted
if I can say
to,
that on TV, but I think it's fine.
We'll move on. Third topic real quick. A lot of teams were battle tested this week, kind of like the topic of our show. Do you think it's good to see teams that fight through and get gritty wins? Or is it kind of concerning going forward like Penn State we hinted at? Is it
it's much better to get those gritty wins.
You'd rather have a gritty win than...
It's great to be Alabama and beat Vanderbilt 59-0. Yeah. But it's also great to be James Franklin and have to, have a game-winning play at the end on the road in a hostile environment at night. It's great to be Dabo Swinney and have to rely on your running game in the fourth quarter to pull out of a slobber knocker at home, because those types of games teach you 10 times more about your team than a 59-0, let's sub all 98 guys on the roster in kind of game. I mean, at that point, you're just getting everybody playing time, and I'd rather see a game where you really have to fight for every inch, claw, tooth, and nail, because I think that you learn way more about your team with those kinds of games.
I think it's good for team morale. I'd say you got to look at it team by team on a team-by-team basis. Penn State, great for them. On the road, hostile environment. Oklahoma, though, against an 0-3 Baylor team, now that raises some questions. That raises my eyebrows just a bit.
But I get that.
You need that to survive because Clemson survived against NC State last year. It happens. It's going to happen throughout the course of a season.
And who did we play? The FCS opponent. Or was it
Troy.
FCS? Troy.
They were Division I, but I know what you mean.
But I get what you're saying. I mean, I understand that the Baylor game for Oklahoma, right? Oklahoma played Baylor.
Yeah.
Didn't look very impressive, but at the end of the day, you get out of there with a win, and it's just like Penn State beating Iowa. I mean, Michigan lost there last year.
Yeah.
So you really can't. I mean, a win is a win. Like Dabo said today, a win is a win. It doesn't matter how you get it as long as you win.
Yeah. Well, before we transition to our next topic, Brian Hazel is spamming my computer right now with texts. Shout out to Brian Hazel. He's watching the show right now. One of our biggest fans.
Is he still up in Boston?
I'm not sure. He might be back.
Why wasn't I invited on this trip?
I know he's having a great time. So shout out to him for tuning in tonight.
Good to see Hazel. We need
great
to catch up with him.
We need to catch up with him
All right.
before. Yep.
Last couple of segments, we're going to go into playoff teams. Mine have shifted quite a bit.
He said he's back, by the way.
Oh, he is?
Yeah.
Mine have shifted quite a bit. What about yours? Where you got 1, 2, 3, 4?
So number one right now, I'm going to stick with Clemson. A little bit of a shaky game against Boston College, but they were able to turn around towards the end.
Okay.
Number two, Alabama. Dominant win against Vanderbilt. I think it just really showed what Bama can truly be after we saw it. Not as much as we wanted to see the first few weeks.
Right.
I had Oklahoma State third. I slid Washington in there, though. I'm extremely impressed with Jake Browning. I really think they're going to go on and win the.
Where was this last year when I was so high on the Huskies and you're like, nah?
Well, now that I saw they can make it to the playoff, I got to look at it a little differently.
Change of heart. Scrooge.
So I got Washington at third, and then fourth, I was tempted to go Georgia. I went with the safer pick with Oklahoma as a better quarterback with Baker Mayfield. I just think if you look at the dynamic of Georgia, probably not a good chance to beat Alabama towards the SEC championship game. I'm going to give Oklahoma the benefit of the doubt and slide them in at 4 right now.
Well, and they're also playing in a conference that's easier than Georgia's in order to win the championship. Exactly. I think Oklahoma has a much better chance at winning their conference championship than Georgia has at winning the SEC championship. Now, you could argue if Georgia goes undefeated in the regular season, makes it to the championship game and loses, they'd still get into the playoff. That's a whole other conversation, and that's all speculation.
Mm-hmm.
For me personally, I'm keeping Clemson at 1. They pulled away late in a tough home game. I have Alabama now back up at 2. Dominant performance. We've been over what they did to Vanderbilt. It's pretty much, you'd have to put them at 2. I mean, you almost could put them at 1 with how Clemson played against BC.
Changed since last week at 4.
Yeah, I had them at 4 last week. We'll put them at 2. Number 3 for me, I've got Boomer Sooner. I know it was a tough game for them. Didn't look so great against Baylor, but I still feel like Baker Mayfield's lighting up scoreboards, and I'm confident in their offense.
Yep.
I know that they can score. Number 4, I'm going to go with the Bulldogs.
Okay.
I know that you kind of went the safer route and picked the Big 12 team, but I think Georgia is for real. And if they keep winning and they give Alabama a good game, or they're able to beat Alabama in the SEC championship game, I think you might see the Bulldogs in the college.
At this rate, you're basically guaranteeing yourself at least one of those to make it in by including both of the top SEC teams. So at least one of your picks will probably get in, you would think, Alabama or Georgia. So
well, I think it's important to know with mine, I'm leaving the Big Ten and the Pac-12
I still think the Big
out.
12 is going to, the Big 10 is going to implode.
Yeah,
I really do. Penn State.
I think this might be a year where you see only 3 conferences get in.
You could, and it's. I mean, the ACC we thought maybe could do that this year, not so much, but even the SEC now contending with Georgia. So we'll see. All
right, quickly to wrap it up, we'll do a Week 5 preview. Some games that we're going to touch on. Number 5 USC versus number 16 Washington State. What's your thoughts on this game? Who you got picking?
I'm going to go with the upset pick with Washington State. I love their offense. USC, extremely alarming to me how last week against Cal, they really struggled and relied basically on 6 turnovers by California. Yeah. I know that says a lot about their defense, but I think that they struggled too much against Cal, and Sam Darnold's not been reliable enough to carry them in a big game like this. And I really think Washington State's going to get the best of them. Luke Falk, 14-1 touchdown interception ratio. That's something to note.
I'm actually going to agree with you. The more I've been sitting here throughout the duration of the show and thinking about it, I'm leaning more towards the Cougars. This game is on the road for USC. USC hasn't played great the last few games. I mean, Texas and then the game that they played last week.
They've caught a couple breaks.
Yeah. So
they really have.
I think Cougars have a chance. I think if they can get over this hurdle, it would be a huge win for the rest of their season.
Absolutely.
And
after they barely squeaked by Boise State,
yeah,
this would be a huge statement win for them.
Yeah, I like that. I'm going to go with the upset pick.
Okay.
Next game that we're going to look at, number 14 Miami versus Duke. You giving the Blue Devils a chance?
This
You want to.
This is a tough game.
You want to.
I'm looking at last year's game with the 8 laterals
That's just
that Miami used to escape Duke. Duke should have won that game, let's just say. It is at Duke. I'm going to go with the upset pick. I think Miami has not. They've played 2 pretty easy teams so far.
Yeah.
Struggled with Toledo. It was
they
38
did.
to 30 in the
16
fourth.
to 10 at the
38
half.
to 30 in the fourth quarter. I think Duke's been the most complete team right now. Their defense won them the game against UNC last week. They had a 61-yard pick six. Miami only played 2 games this year, has not been battle-tested yet. And I think they're overlooking Duke. I think at a 4-0 team, I really like what David Cluck is putting together. And Daniel Jones is a great quarterback for Duke. So I'm going to go with the upset.
I like the Blue Devils. I really do.
I do.
If they could contend for if they had a chance to win the ACC, I'd root for them. But I just don't think they're going to be able to get it done against the Hurricanes. My heart's telling me Blue Devils. My mind's telling me Miami. So I'm going to have to go with Miami in this one.
I hope it doesn't come down to a controversial finish like it did last year, because Lord knows we don't need another one of those. But
Next game, we'll look at SEC matchup. We've got number 7 Georgia versus the Tennessee Volunteers.
Another game that came down to the last minute last year.
It
Crazy
did
finish.
on that Hail Mary.
On the Hail Mary,
31. That game was at Tennessee?
It was at Georgia, because this year's game is in Tennessee.
Yeah, I'm still going Bulldogs.
Got to go
I
Bulldogs.
think they've got too much firepower for Tennessee.
I think
and
Tennessee's,
I had them high on them
their
at all.
3-1 record's just too deceiving. Georgia's just the better team all around. Other than their running back right now, John Kelly, Tennessee has absolutely nothing. They got their top wide receiver out, and Georgia's been completely dominant on the defensive side of the ball. Nick Chubb's been great. One thing to take a note at, Tennessee's field position this year has been terrible.
Yeah.
I was looking at their punting game and just all-around special teams. They have put themselves in such holes going forward that I think Georgia's going to
Georgia's got a pretty good punter.
Georgia has a great punter. I think he's going to capitalize. I think they're going to capitalize on that. So for that reason, I'm going
It's
to go
a
with
field
Georgia.
position battle. I like the Bulldogs.
Yep.
Next game we're going to look at, we've got the Auburn Tigers versus the Mississippi State Bulldogs. Does Mississippi State continue to decline and have a very short stint in the top 25, or do they rebound against Auburn?
Georgia exploited a lot of Mississippi State's troubles that LSU was not able to do. Auburn's line, you honestly can compare Auburn with Georgia. A lot of what they do is similar. Auburn, a great quarterback behind. They have a great run game. Kerryon Johnson had 5 touchdowns last week against Missouri. They're running back for Auburn. I think Mississippi State's still going to be licking their wounds from the Georgia game. I'm going to go Auburn. Pretty close, but I'm going to go with the Tigers on this one.
Yeah, I just don't think that Mississippi I don't know. It's hard because after the LSU game, I know that they have it in them.
You know they have it in them.
I know that they...
Will it come out, though?
Yeah, and that's the thing. And this game, I believe, is on the road for Mississippi State.
Is it in Auburn?
Is it at Auburn?
It's in Auburn, yeah.
It's at Auburn, so I think the magic of Jordan Hare is going to rise up again. I think it'll be a close game.
Yeah.
I think Mississippi State will challenge them in all 4 quarters, and I think it may come down to who has the ball last, but at the end of the day, I think Auburn's going to be able to get it done.
Auburn is 1 score away from being a top 5 team and talked about as one of the best teams in the SEC. If they would have squeaked by Clemson, now they had the opportunities.
Yeah.
They would have squeaked by Clemson, we'd not even be talking about this game as a potential upset at all.
Yes.
I think Auburn
definitely.
really has it in them as a top team that can contend. We said Georgia might be the second best team, but you can't overlook
Right.
Auburn. If Jarrett Stidham can do what he did last week against Missouri, I think they got a realistic shot to blow Mississippi State out.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think they got a good chance. Last game that we're going to look at, game of the week. Clemson's had 2 road games this year.
Game day
Both
again.
times they've been college game day, 8 p.m. prime time on ABC.
And they've won 11 straight road games.
They have.
Says
But
a lot.
This is a tough going into Lane Stadium
You
Saturday
know they're
night.
going to be eager to see Clemson
We
come
got
through
a
that
maroon
tunnel.
out now. We had a
We
blackout
do.
last time. We got a maroon out this time.
Enter Sandman's going to be cool to watch in Blacksburg. But I was looking, I was comparing these 2 teams. Virginia Tech squeaked by West Virginia earlier this year. Clemson, obviously, we've seen what they can do. These teams look a lot like each other. Virginia
they
Tech
do.
prides themselves on defense. They have a freshman quarterback.
Bud
that's been-
Foster's just a genius. He's
been there forever.
You could argue that Bud Foster and Brent Venables are the 2 best defensive coordinators.
There's a
in the
reason he's
country.
been there so long that he has. I think both quarterbacks are comparable, both freshmen. They both know what they can do. Both teams run the ball well.
Yeah.
I'm going to go with Clemson just because, 1, they've won 11 straight road games. 2, I like the coaching more for Clemson. I think they're going to get it done when it counts, and I really think that's what Dabo prides this team on. I know they struggled against Boston College, but I think they're going to learn from that and bounce back. I'm going to go Clemson.
I think what's interesting is Dabo said in his presser today he likes road games more than home games.
I like watching him
He
too.
likes the challenge of going on the road and kind of as he said, packing everything up and then shipping out. And that's interesting. You don't normally hear that from a coach.
No.
Usually coaches kind of like their spot at home and they like playing at their home crowd. I think at the end of the day, though, going back to how they won the BC game, I think it comes down to Clemson's running game.
Yeah.
I think if they're able to control that and they're able to handle the different schemes that Bud Foster is going to throw at them, and if they're able to protect Kelly Bryant, get the ball out a little bit.
Which is going to be huge.
Quick,
Yeah.
right, but also keep them honest with a good running game, then I think Clemson can control the clock, control the time of possession, possibly control field position, and that bodes more in their favor. If it's a passing game, I like VT.
Kelly Bryant does not have to do it all. He just can't be the reason that we lose. And if he turns the ball over, that's going to happen. He knows he has a great running game behind him.
Right.
He just needs to do what he does and not try and be too flashy, just do his job.
I don't think necessarily if you turn the ball over, it's an automatic L. I mean, I know he didn't throw any interceptions against Louisville, and everybody's, oh, he didn't throw any interceptions. I mean, that's great. That's awesome. But at the end of the day, your quarterback's going to make mistakes. Deshaun threw many, many interceptions over the games that he played here, and Clemson was able to rebound almost every single time. It's not good, but it's not a surefire indicator that if Kelly Bryant throws an interception, the game is and all hope is lost.
Is that 70% chance that I see Clemson to win that game? That seems like a lot.
Clemson's got a 70% chance to win this game according to ESPN. I don't really take
like
those
that.
numbers with much gravity. I do think at the end of the day, though, the Clemson will get it done. I think this will be close, much closer
it's
than
gonna
Louisville.
It's going to be tight. Yeah, I got 31-20 Clemson, but I think the game is going to really come down to the end of the fourth quarter, and it's going to be tough. And the crowd might get the best of them, but we've seen that Clemson's good handling that pressure on the road against a big team.
I'm going to go 31-28 Tigers.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, it's going to be a close game.
Kicking game, come down to the end. Alex Spence is going to save the day for us.
Maybe so. We'll just have to see. Well, that's pretty much going to wrap it up for this week's show. Maybe, if we're lucky enough, we can do a remote broadcast at some time in the future. That would be really exciting. But for Bradley Kendall, I'm Jay Smith, and this has been After Further Review.
Lots of love from the Tiger Vision crew. Thank you guys for watching tonight. Ashley, Matthew, Evan, Freddie, all those guys. Appreciate it, guys. Talk to y'all next week.